Enjoyed Ghana.
Oh, I did, yeah. I did.
You did try in your family.
Had all of the barbecues, we take out a side in our fried plantain, but you gotta feed.
What about the eggs? You know Ghanaian.
I did. But you know my favorite food is eggs, so I wasn't having it because I just feel so versatile anyway. So when I saw like the women selling eggs on the street, I was in heaven. And the eggs with, the eggs with fish, the eggs with whatever. I never said no.
Then you're Ghanaian. I mean, the other nationality is probably Ghanaian.
Yeah.
Ghanaian eggs. I know Fortune Rayo is planning to say that with us.
Yeah, Gambians love it too much.
We have Samuel. I mean, you should expect a lot from them. You should expect a lot from them. So they'll be sharing their expertise on everything from the current state of machine translation in Africa to even practical strategies on how we can implement them when it comes to our workflows. So they'll be taking turns to introduce themselves. I want them to introduce themselves because I know they have very interesting um, biographies. So yes, we are going to listen to them. But as we always know, we encourage your active participation. So if you have any questions, you have any contributions during the presentations, you can drop them in the chat box. So yes. So I'm going to give the floor to Laura, ladies first. Laura to introduce herself. I'm not being biased. So Laura, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for inviting me, and also Dr. Isidore for recommending me, and everyone who's here. I'm Laura Gonzales. I do a lot of different things, but they're all connected to language. I will say off the bat, I'm not an expert in African languages, but I am very interested in machine translation and in other than English in the US, but especially speakers of indigenous languages were not being provided with information about health and safety during COVID in a way that was actionable for them. So to give you just a quick example, here in the US, during COVID, the narrative
of phonological system can we build in a machine? So, if a machine is meant to speak Yoruba, for example, how much of the sounds of Yoruba would a machine need to hear to build to understand Yoruba? Because the fact that you're hearing the sound doesn't mean you understand what I'm saying, and the fact that you can return what I ask you to do doesn't mean you actually understood what I say, right? So many people hear to listen, but not here to understand. So many researchers have actually proven that it's possible for machines to only regurgitate the algorithm and not really understand what we're doing. So I'm interested in speech basically because African languages are basically spoken. Most of them are not written. The ones that are written are actually problematic. So I would say I want to do with the speech, which is natural, which is the natural state of things when everyone is relaxed. Okay, and apart from that, I'm interested in building data sets for African languages. Um, so the approach I've taken is that I believe that the cultural system of Africans are not just seen in our text, but also in our interactions as humans. So I love to go to the local context where the languages are spoken to extract the data set, collaborate with local communities, collect the data set, and build it up into both linguistic usage and machine usages. So basically, I would say that I'm more interested in the linguistic generalization of how humans behave because data, language, is not just language. Language is an expression of worldview. Language is an expression of cultural values. Language is an expression of humanity. Language is how I view the world, the way I view it. Language is how I um, language is how I know what to say, where I'm supposed to say it, and how I'm supposed to say it. So these nuances rest on the fact that uh, if you are dealing with, if you are giving them an input to machines, machines needs to understand that you are not just getting list of sentences or signals. You are getting things that are very valuable to human. So I would say I'm interested generally in human generalization about language and how machine can learn or are learning it, basically. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Samuel. I call him the African data set man. So for today's discussion, we made sure we had speakers who had knowledge on, every little thing that the topic is on. So we have Samuel data sets. We have Isidore who has knowledge on localization. We have Olanrewaju who has knowledge when it comes to user interface. We have Laura who has knowledge when it comes to translation and then communication. So yes, they are going to be speaking and they are going to be giving us so much insight. So let's prepare to listen to them. And as always, we always encourage you to be actively participating in the meeting. The meeting is actually for all of us. It's for you as well to learn something. I mentioned that continuous professional development is something that is very essential as language professionals. So let's prepare to learn something. So if you have any questions or contributions during the presentations, please drop them in the chat box. We'll address them after all the speakers have finished speaking. So this session, we are going to have all the speakers speaking. We'll have two speakers take the floor. Laura will be speaking, and afterwards we'll have Olanrewaju. And then we are going to take some questions afterwards. We'll have Samuel and then Isidore. So let's kindly prepare to listen to them and then leave our questions. So you don't have any reason to be shy today. Kindly leave your questions in the chat box. In case you even want to speak, you have the opportunity when the time comes to turn on your video and microphone and then speak to us. So yes, so let's dive into the conversation. Laura, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you so much, Rebecca. It's very intimidating in this group to go first, but I will do my best. And I echo Rebecca's encouragement to anybody. Please put questions in the chat or share. You can unmute. You don't have to feel like you're interrupting me or anything like that. I'll go ahead and share my screen here. I want to share a couple of insights from research that I've done. And then, like I said, I'm not particularly an expert and would never claim to be an expert in African languages, no matter how interested I am in learning. I just consider myself a student, not an expert at all. So I would really appreciate any feedback or thoughts and ideas that you might be willing to share with me. But I also wanted to share with you a little bit about the work that I've done studying the relationship between human translators and machine translators. And I want to highlight a couple of things today. Specifically about what do human translators do that machine translators are not able to do, and how can we bridge that gap? And also, how can we as human translators continue improving the efficiency of machine translation, specifically through collaborating with people who speak minoritized languages? So that would be the case for many African languages that don't have a lot of representation on the internet today. A little bit about the work that I've done. So some of the excerpts I'll be sharing with you will come from these three books. The first one, Sites of Translation, I looked at how community organizers and translators in a Hispanic serving community center did translations for their community. They leveraged machine translation, but they also paired that machine translation with cultural knowledge, with linguistic knowledge, and just with an approach and knowledge of their environment. And then the second book, Designing Multilingual Experiences in Technical Communication, will focus on one point that I want to make today about the role that user experience research can play in machine translation. So for many of the languages that we're talking about, it's not just about translation, but even about the infrastructure or the hardware that is needed in order to improve digital representation of languages. For example, we need new keyboards that account for different types of alphabets so that we can think about how translation may happen more efficiently. And the only way we're going to do this is by testing and conducting research on how effective the new technologies are for the very communities they intend to serve. So just sharing a little bit about that. Okay, so the first point I want to make is that English was developed with English, the internet was developed with English at the center. So many of the dictionaries, the archives, the functionality of the internet remains with English at the center. And what this means is that when we are creating translation capabilities or machine learning capabilities in languages other than English, oftentimes what we're doing is retrofitting capabilities onto a technology that was not designed for our languages. And so that has a lot of implications. The entire system of the internet was designed with English at the center, and it still remains so. But that doesn't mean that communities, including African language speakers or speakers of different African languages, are not resisting that English or Western centricity of the internet. So this really interesting paper, I'll put it in the chat, by Nakoto and al. Is called Participatory Research for Low Resource Machine Translation, a Case Study in African Languages. They said a couple of things that are really interesting. One is that despite improvements in machine translation over the past decade, machine translation is centered around a few high resource languages. And I really like the term high resource here, because it's not saying the languages that are not represented are less than or they're not as good. It's just saying the languages that do have a lot of representation have a lot more resources invested into them. And so if we really want to improve machine translation for African languages, what we need is to invest more resources into the communities that speak those languages. The second point the authors make is that Africa currently has 2,144 living languages, and you can counter that point that I'm citing that as a source. I know there's debate on this. But they say despite this, African languages account for a small fraction of available language resources, and NLP research rarely considers African languages. One of the reasons that natural language processing research rarely considers African languages is because only 2% of national language processing researchers across the world come from the entire continent of Africa. So there is a need to invest in encouraging researchers from different African countries who speak different African languages to be invested and have the access and the capability and the support that they need to become NLP researchers and therefore improve these technologies. So the technologies are not going to get better without the people having access and having what they need to be invested in improving these tools. Okay, so I want to give you an example, and this is from my book. This is not in an African context at all, but I think the implication still applies. What is it that human translators do that machine translators are still catching up with? So this is just an example from a student. Her name was Natalie. I was recording her computer screen while she was doing a translation, and she was translating the name of a newspaper article from English to Spanish. The title of the newspaper article was Development Plan Threatens Orlando Park. And the first thing she wanted to look up as a translator was this word threaten. She wanted to look it up not because she didn't know how to translate threaten into Spanish, but because she said, I use machine translation to get options for my work. So human translators are using machine translation not to get the answers, not to get their final draft, but to get options, to be more creative, to have different possibilities for how they could translate information for their community. So Natalie put threaten into Google Translate and asked it to translate into Spanish. And the first result that came up for Natalie was amenazar. And Natalie said, nah, I'm not using amenazar. So what she did is she put this word harm into Google Translate, and then Google Translate gave her the word daño, which she then conjugated into the word daña, and that's what she finally used in her translation. So I conducted an interview with Natalie after she did this translation, and I asked her, the first question I asked her is, why, when you got amenazar, why didn't you use that word in your translation? And she said, you know, amenazar is like a physical threat, like I'm threatening somebody physically. That didn't work here. What the machine gave me was not good. Because we're talking about a park, we're not talking about people. And then I said, okay, that makes sense. So why did you put in the word harm into Google Translate next instead of finding a synonym or doing something else? And Natalie said, I wanted to put another word in English, harm, into Google Translate because I just know that Google Translate works best when you input English first, when English is at the center. And that's exactly true. So cross-language information retrieval, so retrieving information written in a language different from the user, is still very English-centered. What that means is the more queries you put in the more dominant languages, the more options you're going to get. And Natalie, being a bilingual speaker, already knew this. So a human translator, in this case, an undergraduate translation student, Natalie, knows so much about how to manipulate the machine translation so that she can provide accurate localized translations for her community. And this type of localization and adaptation is something that machines are still really struggling with. And this is with a Western dominant language like Spanish. So this issue is only made more intense in African languages or some African languages. Human translators go through an entire process in their translation work that machines are still catching up with. So in my analysis, for example, this is just a very brief summary. When a translator receives a translation, the first thing they do is they read that document. Then they start by doing research into what the topic of that document is. That's something that the machine doesn't do. The machine does not do research into what topic you're talking about. Are you talking about science or medicine? Or are you talking about arts and cultures? Then the human translator starts doing the translation. And then they also engage in some design because they have to redesign a lot of pages and a lot of documents, especially nowadays when so much of the work is happening in visual context. They do some formatting, editing, proofreading, and then perhaps the most important thing that most translators do, human translators, is collaboration. One of the biggest rules of translation, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, is that you never just translate something by yourself and return it to the client. It always has to get proofread or verified by another translator. The same is true for machine translations. We never want to get a machine translation and then assume that it's correct without collaborating with it, ensuring that it's as accurate as it possibly can be. Oh, I don't know why this, okay. So to give you another example, this is from when I was working as a translator at an organization. So much of what humans do, human translators do, relates to visual design as well, because these are all examples of the original document and the translated document in Spanish. And you see that the translators have to create what we call mirror translations. So they have to like recreate the seals, the logos, the entire structure of a paper, so that the person who's reading something in the target language actually understands where the information goes. And now we have tools that can help us with this redesign, with this transformation, but they still don't always get it right. So all in all, what I want to emphasize is machine translation still relies on humans. It's just that more human effort and resources have been invested in Western languages than in non-Western languages. So this is a diagram that again comes from the article from Nakoto et al., showing all the necessary agents in the machine translation process. So this is for machine translation. For machine translation tools to be built, you still need human expertise. You need translators, you need content creators, you need curators, you need evaluators, and you need language technologists. So the machine learning and the machine translation software that has been developed encompass teams of people, most of whom came from the West and speak Western languages. And so now, as we're building machine translation tools that can account for languages like many different African languages, we need those teams of people. We need translators, content creators, curators who have access and resources to work with teams to create these databases that will allow for translation in African languages to be more accurate and effective. So I know I'm at 10 minutes, so I want to just end with two frameworks that I think can help us with this. And Nakoto et al., what they did is they actually built a team of people who speak different African languages to build databases and have teams of translators, curators, and verifiers to build this database across these different African languages, and then to test the effectiveness of these databases in order to see if they actually work for different communities. So the two big things that I think are critical for building effective collaborations or effective machine translation strategies into it is to incorporate these two things into your workflow. One is user experience research, which is just understanding how users interact with translated content in order to develop more accurate language databases and benchmarks. So when you do a translation, you're building out a database in a new language or a language that is maybe underrepresented. It's really critical to invest the time and the resources in testing some of these materials with people so that you're not building benchmarks incorrectly on things that will not work. Investing that time up front can be really helpful. And then the second one is inviting community members who speak these underrepresented languages to learn about language modeling, machine translation, and contribute to training these language models. I don't think it's a secret that, for example, for the team that Nakota and I can be really helpful. Google was one of their sponsors because these big companies, they want more representation on the internet. They realize that people speak many more languages nowadays, and that we would use their tools more if these tools reflected our language needs. But that doesn't mean we should give our expertise to Google, Facebook, and these companies for free. It just means we need to be informed. We need to know about how language modeling works, and we need to provide access for our communities to get credit for this work and be designers, not just users of these different technologies. So I will end with that. Thank you so much. I'm happy to take any questions afterwards.
Laura, thank you so much for this insight. Please, if you have any questions, let's kindly leave that in the chat box. Any questions? Do we have any questions for Laura? Do we have any questions for Laura? Let's kindly leave that in the chat box. But as you're waiting for questions, so I realized that in the registration, there were some people who equally asked some questions based on the profiles represented. And for Laura, there was one who asked, do you think people in some villages
learn about machine
in 2050,
to learn about language modeling, machine translation, and
will be able to
to
learn official and African languages through machine translation? Do you think people will be able to do that?
I think it's possible. I think there are people already organizing to make that happen through maybe even some of the work that Samuel was talking about, which is like recording the spoken languages and building the infrastructures and the data sets to make that possible. I think it's very, very possible, but I think we need to work collaboratively to make that happen because that takes time, money, and expertise that's not always available, made available to people who deserve it. And so we who have the resources and the privilege need to ensure that we advocate for that to happen so that it does by 2050 or sooner.
So thank you so much, Laura. Please, if you have any questions, kindly leave them in the chat box. We are going to address all your questions before we leave here. So I'm going to give the floor now to Olanrewaju, who is equally going to speak on machine translation. She's going to introduce, the fact that there's no language left behind. So yes, Olanrewaju, you have the floor now.
Can you also see my screen? Sorry.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Yes. So my presentation is titled "No Language Left Behind: Neural Machine Translation for African Languages." So to begin this presentation, I want to begin with the story of Google Maps in Africa, particularly in Nigeria. Google Maps was introduced to Africa, but to Nigeria sometimes around in 2017. And I know that there are a few Nigerians here. And if you were one of the early users of Google Maps, you would agree that a lot of Nigerians found it inaccessible. And it was rather funny because I remember using Google Maps then with my uncle, and he had this really funny accent that my uncle could not understand. And my uncle was like, "What is that?" You know, he got the names of streets wrong. You know, it got direction wrong, because if you've been to a lot of African countries, then you know that the streets are numbered in a funny way. So for a lot of people, it was a question of importing or bringing in the technology that did not fit within the local context, using a foreign accent that is either British, Australian, or American. And then, it brings in that question of language inclusion, of language justice, particularly within the African context, knowing that this technology would be used in Nigeria, but they did not make the technology work for local leaders in that context. So Nigerians had to put in a lot of effort. They had to advocate for a more localized version of Google Maps. And it took people like Kola Tibosun to really put together and to really crowdsource for a more localized Google Maps. Then I worked better in Nigeria. But I want to begin my presentation. I want to begin my presentation with a quote, and it says that language comes first. It is a lifeline to wellness and healing. However, global health is monolingual, leaving behind countless voices and lives that deserve to be heard and healed. The future of data health in Africa is tied to language. So I research user experience and usability in transnational context, particularly in Nigeria. And one of the primary arguments of my research is that health disparity is tied to language exclusion. If we do not put language at the heart of technology design, we really cannot improve health outcomes. And so I go back over to COVID-19 pandemic. A lot of people ask questions why the data from Africa was not complete or was not comprehensive, particularly for COVID-19 and also for other viruses and other diseases on the African continent. And the question has been, well, where are these technologies not working, particularly health information systems? Why are they not working for Africa? What seems to be the problem with Africa? Now, we tend to gloss over these problems, or we tend to overlook the main problems that these technologies have, which is the fact that they were not designed for Africa in the first place, and the designers have refused to make them localized, or have refused to translate those technologies for local users on the African continent. So DHIS2, which is the largest health information architecture on the African continent, used by every African country, was designed in Oslo, Norway. And this technology has limited localization and translation, particularly on the African continent. So one thing you would ask yourself is, how do you fit the diversity of Africa into one language, which is English language, that is used to design health information systems? And like I said at the beginning of my presentation, health language is really the lifeline of health, right? How do you communicate with patients? How do you design technologies that should save the lives of people if those technologies are not even designed in the language of users? So one of the things we need to begin to ask ourselves is, how can we make technologies, how can we make our technologies in particular, how can we make them more inclusive, how can we make them more adaptable for people in Africa? So I'm going to go over, So I said that there's loss in translation, and the idea is that a lot of data or a lot of uses that we should have for technologies do not happen. A lot of the technologies are fragmented because of lack of translation and localization. And neural machine translation is considered or has been described as the future of translation. We call it the most advanced type of translation. But how does Africa even fit within what we call the most advanced type of translation, knowing that there's a lack of data set, for a lot of African languages on the global health scene? So how can we fit, or how does Africa fit into this advanced health landscape that should, knowing that Africa is perhaps one of the most vulnerable continents in regards to global health or in regards to health at all? So how can we fit? So the idea is, so the problem is that a lot of, the idea is that global health itself, the global health landscape itself is monolingual. If you look at the leadership of global health organizations, they are usually from the West, right? So if the leadership are from the West, it also implies that the design, the materials, the policies themselves are also monolingual, or lean towards certain populations and exclude people from low and middle income countries like Nigeria, and also particularly Africa on the global health landscape. So how can neuro machine translation themselves, how can they help improve health in Africa, right? So and let's not forget that as well as even as we say that neuro machine translation is advanced and can be the future of health for a lot of countries, it also has a lot of biases present in it. In the training data, a lot of biases that leads to exclusion in health. For example, if you look at DHIS2, which is considered the biggest health information architecture on the planet, that is designed for Africa, but has not been translated into any African language, which is ironic because it's like you don't use this technology in any other part of the world except Africa, but it has not been translated into any African language. So you want to ask yourself, if this technology has not been translated for the people that it is designed for, then how do you expect it to work for these people that need this technology the most to gather health information, to gather health data? So a lot of information has been lost because of this language exclusion, or because of the lack of or the absence of translation efforts, particularly in health. And one of the things I'm advocating, or one of the solutions I'm advocating to resolving this problem in Africa, is what I've called the Google Street View approach. Now, if any of you have seen the Google Street car, right? I don't know if any of you have seen that, which is a car that moves around from street to street, taking pictures of places, and then uploading those pictures on Google Maps, to help with navigation. And that approach is community driven, because if you use Google Maps as well, you have the ability to upload information, you have the ability to include pictures of places you've been to, you have the ability to even include reviews on Google Maps. So it's more of a collaborative, community-based effort that has now been integrated into Google Street Maps. So Google does not generate information, or Google does not generate pictures of your house, or pictures of your street, or pictures of a place abstractly. They go to places, like they drive to places. And sometimes you will see a person with a mounted GPS camera going around taking pictures, and it's really cool. So what I'm advocating for is that we need to take this same approach to machine translation, particularly in regards to Africa. We need to go to those communities and actually work with users in those communities to translate and to crowdsource for machine translation. We don't need to take an abstract approach and exclude the users who use the technologies, particularly when it relates to health technologies or machine translation tools. So without community involvement, we cannot achieve effective machine translation in Africa. And also, there's also the need to understand that machine translation in Africa is in a lot of ways tied to the socio-economic context of the African continent. So if we want to improve, or we want to reimagine machine translation on the African continent, we also need to look at the socio-economic context, the cultural diversity and the linguistic diversity of the African continent, knowing that there are several regional and dialectic variations in Africa. So how do we put these things together to achieve effective machine translation for Africa? So it's really about working with local communities and trying to get them involved, like the Google approach. Like you go to the homes of people, you go to the streets with a car or with a Google Map person to take those pictures. So, and that's what I'm also saying, that we need to move from place to place and really work with local communities on the African continent to achieve effective machine translation, particularly for my kind of research, which is health information systems or usability in health and medicine. Because health itself is also something that is personalized and that cannot be approached on a global scale. So we need to approach that individualized and community-based approach by working with local users, by working with local communities to crowdsource and to build data sets for machine translation in Africa. All right, thank you. And that would be my bit for the presentation.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Olanrewaju. This was so interesting. I'm glad mentioned the fact that we need to involve the locals when collecting data. We shouldn't work abstractly. This is so interesting. Thank you so much. Please, if anyone has a question for Olanrewaju, kindly leave that in the chat box. Kindly leave that in the chat box. So we have a question here from our registration form. So it says, how can African countries be better positioned to leverage machine translation when it comes to its present educational structure? I don't know why that question is addressed to you, but yes, in its present educational structure, how can African countries be better positioned? Yes.
Can you come again with the question?
So it says, how can African countries be better positioned to leverage machine translation, especially in the light of its present educational structure? Do you think our educational structure is going to help, I mean, when it comes to positioning ourselves with machine translation?
Yeah, I think that our advocacy for machine translation should begin with education sector, as a matter of fact. I think we need to overhaul the current education models that we have. And one of the things I tell my nephew, who is 7 years old, who speaks very little Yoruba language, I tell my cousin, my nephew, like, you live in Nigeria, your parents are Nigerians, and you speak very little Yoruba language. I find that disturbing. And I think that a lot of young people in Africa, even from the foundational schools, the elementary schools and the high schools, have limited exposure to African languages in their education. One of the things we keep talking about China is their ability to integrate their language into everything, into technologies, into education. So wherever you go to, everything is conducted in Chinese. And using Chinese as a foundation for learning, education, commerce, government has really helped them to promote and integrate Chinese language in everything. And I feel like that needs to be done in Africa as well, particularly in the education scene. We need to integrate our local languages at that basic foundation for elementary schools and even in colleges. I studied English in school, and throughout my education, I would have instructors trying to force us to speak phonetically like Americans. I'm like, I am Nigerian. I live in Nigeria. Your teacher is in Nigeria. You should not try to change my accent to suit that of an American or that of a British person. So I feel like there's a need to really begin to build at the educational level to ensure that machine translation itself begins from within the education sector. Because if you're able to build the education sector on African languages, then things can really move out, and research on machine translation can really begin to move out from there onto the global space or into other spaces. So that's really what I feel, because most of the research actually happens within the education sector. Our students are designing apps in Nigeria, in Kenya, in Uganda, right? In the universities, they're doing a lot of research that is important. So if we really begin by introducing our languages at the education level, we really can do a lot of work in terms of machine translation, even in terms of technology design on the African continent.
Rebecca, can I chime in a little bit?
Yes, you can, Isidore.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good question too, and thank you, Laura, for the response. I think that the question also leads to conversations about decolonization, right? How do we decolonize? And then decolonization means unlearning and learning Western ideas and thinking that Western models are the best, right? And so ignoring what local people know, ignoring our local cultures, our local philosophies and values. If machine translation will work for us, there is a need for us to integrate local philosophies, local cultures, local practices. And it's also a question of power, How powerful are African countries, right? A question of power, a question of economy. The U.S. can just tell Zuckerberg, U.S. Congress can tell Zuckerberg, come to Congress, come and respond to these issues. U.S. Congress can tell TikTok, come to Congress. Can any African country order Zuckerberg or Facebook to come to the continent to respond to issues of denigration? No. So it has to do with power. Are we powerful enough? How do we become powerful enough so that we can speak back and talk back at people who design? But one of the ways also is what we've all been talking about, collaboration. How do we collaborate with them? How do we collaborate with them? How do we say that we have something that is valuable? You need to include those in the design of technologies. I think that these are very powerful issues. And the key one will be decolonization. We need to decolonize our thoughts. We need to decolonize our curriculum and help to think about making our cultures and philosophies the center. And also empowering local designers, right? We need to empower local designers, fund local designers. Our legislators, it's a policy issue as well. Our local policy makers should make policies that can empower local people who know and understand our cultural practices and not just easily go to the market or go on the market and buy any technology that exists because they are told that technology really works. How can we help our people design? I always say that Western designers design technologies around their social problems, right? Those social problems, they design technologies to solve their problems. When all is done, they market it and internationalize it. How can we also identify our local problems and design technologies locally to resolve our local problems? What we are doing now is using Western approaches, Western technologies to resolve non-Western local problems. And that's the issue. If we are not able to take back that power to decolonize, it's going to be tough. And we will have this conversation over and over and over and over again, and nothing will be done. So that's the letter I want to add to what Moton Ryan said. We'll give it to
Thank you so much. So we have a question. Okay, we have Paul. Paul's hand is raised. Paul,
okay.
You have.
So, Rebecca, thank you. What I would like to add is that from what Isidore is saying, that is a very fundamental thing we have to do, because the basis of every technology or every erection of any engineering product is to solve a problem. Now, what is our problem as Africans? What are we trying to resolve? What is the first thing we are trying to solve as a problem? So if we don't understand the problem, we would just... Oh, sorry, there is a noise in my background. Sorry, Rebecca. Sorry. So that is the very first thing we have to understand. So if we don't understand the problem we are solving, we're just going for Western solutions, and then we'll end up just promoting what they have developed, feeding them with money, and that is what we will end up with. So what Mr. Isidore is saying is true. The leaders of African countries should come together, and then let's develop something for ourselves, incorporating our translators in our languages, and I think we'll be good to go. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you for your contribution. I mean, this is so interesting. So Paul left a question in the... I know Laura has responded to it, but Motunrayo, can you respond to this as well? It says, how can local translators collaborate with Google to feed them with information to help improve Google search outcomes, familiar with the natives of that language? Yes.
I think those opportunities for collaboration exist already, right? But like Dr. Iti just said before, it's really a question of power, right? When you're bringing a technology to any place, the local users are usually capable. They have the expertise to develop these solutions themselves. They can collaborate, like those collaboration opportunities are there. But then would you allow local users to do those things? Now, the problem is usually about who brings the money, right? Whoever brings the money usually controls the design. For example, I mean, go to Nigeria, the train station, the train system was solely funded by China, right? So you go on the trains, you see some descriptions in Chinese, and they're trying to change all of that. So it's really about who brings in the funding and what control they have over these tools. So I would say that the space for collaboration is always there, but then do we allow local users to have a say or have a voice in the tools and technologies that work for them? For example, DHI is tool that I spoke about before, the biggest health information system in the world, used by most African countries, was designed in Oslo, Norway, right? But has not been translated into any African language. That is unbelievable because this technology is used by Africa. And if it's used by Africa, then it should really be translated into African languages and not into languages that people do not use that in the West. So there's always space for collaboration, right? Local users are always willing to collaborate, but we need to give them space. Like we really need to let local users lead the way with these technologies. If you go to Kenya, if you go to Nigeria, if you go to Ghana, there are lots of brilliant designers who are doing amazing work on the African continent that you really can collaborate. If you give them the opportunity, they would improve the technologies, they would make them better because they know what happens in this context. They live there, they'll deal with these problems every day, but you just need to give them that room, for collaboration without really managing or micromanaging or really trying to control what happens with the design of these technologies or these tools.
Thank you so much, Motunrayo. Oh, I hope your question is answered. So we are going to the next phase of this webinar. We are going to have Olanrewaju Samuel, who is equally going to present the African data set man. He's going to present and then give his contributions as well. So Samuel, you have the floor.
I hope can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. We can.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So yeah, I mean, a lot has been said already, and I wonder whether I have a lot of things to say. So thank you so much for should I say the earlier speakers or the contributors? They really set my mind, and I felt like jumping out of my coat. But today I'm just gonna be identifying two gigantic problems, and I'm gonna be explaining just one strategy that I'll be proposing a strategy that we can use to solve it. Basically because I am interested in language data documentation and collection, curation, translation, whatever thing that happens to language data, I'll be coming from that approach. So first, when we say we are going to be describing, or when we're going to be saying, when we say we want to leverage machine translation strategically in the African context. What do we really mean? So simply, I put it here as what are the challenges that exist surrounding machine translations globally and locally? So what are the challenges that we have, and then that has been existed in the literature, and then how can we come into the play? So there are different machine translation technologies, but the efficiency of a machine is that the good and bad thing of a machine is the machine cannot think of themselves. Machine can only think of what we ask them to think about. While I know there are self-learning, right? But then everything machines self-learn is based on what machine can learn from, which is the input. And the input given to a machine is the data. So data is how we represent human language. So human language is a knowledge system, and the input we give to machine is how we train machine to understand the human language system. So because we don't just speak for speaking's sake, it is only a radio that speaks without expecting a response. Humans speak to communicate, and because we speak to communicate, we tend to present a worldview. Like we have an aim for saying what we are saying, and we are expecting someone to react the way we want them to react. Okay, so the strategy that we'll be developing will be that we leverage on, okay, how much of our language is represented in these big machine translation systems. And I'm not talking about the fact that African languages are low resource. I'm saying that even the ones that are getting some resources, how are we representing them? Are they representatives? Because data, it's not just data. Data is
So I would
representing
say
a
that the
group of
space
people
for
that speak the
collaboration is
language.
always there.
It's an
But then
identity
do we
of that mark the state, the living, the settlement of some people. So the strategies that I understood is one is just data. All right. So, and thank you, Laura, for quoting that Nekoto paper. So, our recent paper was presented at CVPR just last month, and it presented a community engaging system of how we can machine data sets, data community, and stuff like that. So you may want to check those out. It's by Nekoto and I and um, some other scholars. All right. So then, if we understood that the input we give to machine is the language and the knowledge system of human, then what are the challenges that exist in this regard? Okay. So I'm going to talk about one, the translation needs. So a translation is a case where you have two documents that does not really communicate the same thing, even though they represent an abstract language. So sometimes ago, earlier this year, I've been thinking that there is actually an abstract language that we all are translating from, but I'm gonna leave that out of debate so that I don't cause a lot of questions. Okay, but translation is just saying that you have a language that you are translating from, and then you see that when you place the original document and the one that you translated, it's just as if they are different languages. In fact, this scholar Wolanski said that they are dialects of a standard language. So when you have a document and you translated that document, then to a native speaker, it seems that they are two different languages, whereas your goal is actually to take the thought of one from A to B. So the difficulty is because there are no two languages that are the same. Even between a standard variety and a variation of that language, you see they are different. For example, in Yoruba, the Yoruba you hear from Ife Yoruba is not the one you find in Lagos. Both sometimes in lexical items, sometimes in phonological patterns, and sometimes in the accent. Okay, so because of that, translation is just a term that describes the challenge that you have, finding it hard to even translate between English and Spanish, which are high resource languages. Now, imagine if these languages are having this kind of problems. What happens to African languages that we don't even have data sets, neither do we have enough data sets? So, language represents worldview, Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, and the worldview is there is a way a Yoruba man views the world, and the way a European will view the world. This is debatable, but we can't we can't totally discard this hypothesis that it is possible to some degree that our worldview is shaped by the kind of culture and the kind of language that we speak. So we have the issue of translation. Is that the first one? The second one is what I personally call directionality. So there has been a long-standing challenge concerning how it is easier to translate to English and not from English. So this is a research done by Bellinkov, and this is just the idea behind the thesis. Okay, we found out that it become easier for you to translate to English, but if you want to translate from English, then it becomes a bit difficult. You know why? Because from a linguistic point of view, I know that when I'm trying to understand a data, I am trying to I am understanding the data from A to B and not from B to A. I'm gonna give you an example. If I say I love music in Yoruba in English, and I ask someone translate this to um, Yoruba, the person would say mo fẹ́ràn, and then music becomes a problem. Some will say orin, and then orin is not music. Orin is actually song, right? It's a song. So if you take that from English to Yoruba and Yoruba back to English, you see that the end product of this second English is not looking, the choice of words, sometimes even the syntactic patterns, is not looking the same from the first English you are moving from, because directionality plays a huge role in translation, which Belinkov was trying to say, but he didn't say it in terms of directionality. He was just saying that he was testing how this thing is very difficult. Now, another challenge or another response I'm going to give to this is that many models that are developed based on power, like Dr. Isidore, if I get it right, pardon me, was talking about the power because the resources. Okay, Africans don't have the resources. We don't have the power. So we claim to create models in African language by actually evaluating the ones that have been done, which is actually from these high resource languages. So what we are trying to actually do is actually trying to force a Yoruba man, like I love the way Motrayo put it, like you try to force me as a Yoruba boy to speak like an American. It's not gonna work. If I'm true to my identity, then I can't speak like you, and that is why I'm a Nigerian. If it is possible for you to take English and take English to make Yoruba, then it is possible for anybody to be anything, and that would deny the essence of living in the first place. So, because these models are developed from English and from these high resource languages, then many creating of models from African languages actually benchmark most of the time the existing one, which is having this directionality problem already. So, when you see these issues, then we force English on our languages. We force Spanish on our languages. So the problem is not only that the languages are high resource, but we have actually decided to not decolonize ourselves and rest on them. And then it's understandable because they don't have the resources. The computing power is expensive. For you to build like a chat GPT, you're gonna have a lot of computing power, which we don't have most of the time. So I explained two problems. I explained translationalism and I explained directionality. And so we have two generalizations. So I have translation creates language, not the standard variety. So when you are translating, the translated document seems to be like you are creating a variety of those languages. In Yoruba, if I said, if I'm translating I love music to Moferan or in that, Moferan or would be I enjoy song, sort of, and not the worldview you are bringing from English. So it's difficult, right? So when you compare that, I love music, I enjoy song, and I love music. You may say to some extent they are not experience the same, but if you go from I love music to I love song, and then you translate I love song to Yoruba, then you see the chain keeps going, and you keep having different patterns and different structures, which Velonsky has called creating a standard variety of a standard language, or creating a variety of a language from the standard form. Okay, the second generalization that we have is learning to a language is easier than learning from it. So you learn from a language to a language means you explain this one and then you just put an equivalent rather than trying to say you want to learn from this and put the equivalent here. Okay, so what am I proposing? So I haven't looked at these two major issues, both in African context and in the world at large, concerning machine translation systems. So I have these cylinders. I call them buckets actually. See, the buckets signify the community, the language, the people. See, two buckets, right? They are two worldview apart. you can see the arrow here means they are pointing to two different directions and they are connected. So S is going to T. I mean source language, and target, T. So S is going to T as T is going to S. So what I'm proposing is we should translate within language and not translate from languages. And this is what I mean. I mean that, for example, if I want to translate a document from English to Yoruba, I should first understand the meaning of that word in Yoruba. Then I use the context of culture. I use the context of culture. I use the culture as my context. Sorry. I use the culture as my context. Then I explain the concept in sentences. Then I summarize it and I give it a word, which you might call terminology development, but I'm not using it in this case. I'm just trying to give or propose a strategy that we can use to curb these problems. So before you begin translation, to mitigate to some extent the influx of different worldview back and forth in different languages, in different cultures, then we should try to understand each term in the target language, which is the cultural context of the language, then describe it in the cultural context of the language, provide a summarization, and then give it a word. So when we have a target language, so we translate within the summary that we give, and then we use the provided context to understand the translation, and then we explain the concept from the source, and then we provide a summarization, then we provide a coinage. So, for example, if we stretch this away from cultural context, we can have the educational context, right? We can have the medical context. Everything should be within that context, right? So, for example, if I'm to translate a scientific document from English to Yoruba, and you see chloride, you see, you see some scientific, you see those names, those elements, and then you're trying to understand, okay, what are these words, and how do I put them to Yoruba? Yes, because they're not your words. First, you really want to understand them in the word where it is used, and then break it down by explaining, by getting the explanation, provide the summary, and provide a word for the summary. So I believe that if we can approach machine translation systems in this manner, we create more data set and we create usable data set. Not only usable, but we create a representative data that really represents what I'm saying as a Yoruba person, for example. Um, Thank you very much for your attention. Let me know if you have questions.
Thank you so much, Samuel. Thank you so much. We learned a lot. I mean, I felt like I was in the classroom at a point. You were really teaching us. It's so interesting. So we have some questions for you. So the first question I have here is, how do linguists gather language data and collate them? And I think in relation to that, we can equally ask this question, which is, how can we build a strong database for African languages? Yes.
Yeah, so I got that question a lot. I usually get this question a lot of time. Okay, so I'm going to keep it very simple. In linguistics, there is a course that we take, generally, field methods in linguistics. I think most of the time do it in your penultimate year. And field method in linguistics is basically how we can go to the field to, to extract data sets. So we have a word list, a list of words. We translate them or interpret them to the target language, and then we try to understand the grammar of the target language by collecting the sentences. So we collect the word list, we collect the words in context because we know that the word is not existing alone, it has to exist in a context. So we create a context and we go back and forth till we understand the grammar of the language. After this process, the end result is usually a data set. So a data set is built from your field methods class. So if you don't take or if you have not taken anything like field methods, how can you build data sets? I'm going to give you two strategies that I've used in the past. I have used the image to text and speech and text to translation. So image to text and speech. This is the approach. Suppose that I want to build a data set in Akan, a Ghanaian language. I don't speak it, right? As a linguist, I've been trained to understand how the grammar of a language works. So I don't need to worry about whether I speak the language or not. I have actually built data sets for language I don't speak. And I've worked on different languages that I don't speak. I don't have to speak the language to understand the structure of the language and to teach machine the same. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to generate images. Two things. I could ask the local communities to take pictures of their environment. Just go to places, just take different pictures. When I have the pictures, I look into a computer system and ask them, can you describe these images? And say, yes, in your language. Tell me in your language and tell me in English. Tell me in your language and tell me in English. Then you type the same thing in your language. So I could divide the task into the speech and the text. So that is one way to build a data set. So you have the image, you ask them to speak the description of the image and write the same. The second approach is the field methods approach that I explained earlier on. So I would have a word list, sentences, and paradigms to elicit the data set. So, for example, I could decide to say I want to document the cultural systems in ACAN. So, because machines don't go to the local settings, there are words that come from humans that are actually cultural. When I say cultural in this context, I mean they are practices, like the masquerades. I know Nigeria, we have a lot of masquerades. Like in Yoruba culture, we have different type of masquerades. We have birthright, we have death right, we have naming ceremony, which are words that creep into our colloquial speeches. So if you think that you can separate yourself from these practices, is to deny the fact that those practices were actually part of your culture. So because these terms and these tokens are in our colloquial speech, we need not just to build a model for we need not build a model that understands our colloquial speech, but a model that understands our cultural values. And how do we build a data set for our cultural values? So suppose I want to build a data set that understands that there is a way a Nupe man in Nigeria reacts to the death of somebody, and there is a way a Yoruba man reacts. So I've had this joke in the past that if you are in a place in Nigeria and somebody dies, there are people that they are like hired criers. They cry and you don't see the water coming out of their eyes because they are there. They are like they just make the noise. Ooh, ooh, ooh. But if you are with a Nupe man, for example, and somebody dies, all you hear from them is casa, and the word casa, it doesn't really mean it doesn't have a correlate. It's just an expression of agony, right? And it is right in it's right in the culture. In fact, Yoruba pick it up, but I don't want to go into the nuances that surround that term. What I'm trying to say is this term is in our day-to-day activities, and that even the word wahala that everybody here there, it's from a language and it transcends into that from the cultural practice of a language. So you can't domain-specific data collection. A domain-specific data collection is when you want to build a data set and you want to build it in a specific domain. Let's say you want to build a data set that mirrors the cultural practices of Akan people. I will go to Akan community, talk to the village leaders, collaborate with them, seek their consent, tell them that okay, this data set is for us, it's for you. Okay, I'm not here to steal your language. I'm here to train you to use your language. Okay, so you ask them, okay, can you narrate how birthright is done, how death right is done in Akan? Say yes. The first thing that happens is a man does this, a woman does that. If it's a rich person, it is that. You see the stories, you see the terminology coming out from the words you not hear from anywhere. You begin to hear them from the context of your data collection. So when you collect that, you can either elicit by breaking the sentences, the conversation into sentences by how? It's a lot of process. Okay, so I'm trying to simplify it. Okay, you can either ask them to narrate it and then you transcribe it using IPA charts, which is what we linguists use. Then from the IPA charts to the text, that is the orthography, ask them to listen to the transcription and the audio to verify what you've written, whether it is right. Then you can map this using different linguistic software like ELAM, map text to the audio score line, this. So that is another way to build a machine. So I explained the image, the system. You can use the word list, the sentence, and the paradigm. Then in this case, you can collect a domain-specific data set for machine. So because you're building a very large data set, sometimes you want to consider the number. The word lists are actually not exhaustive. So what you do is, for every word, you use the morphological properties and static properties. I know this can be a bit complex, but I will try to simplify it. So suppose I have 400 word lists and I want to build 500 million sentences from 400 word lists. How do I do it? And I've got these questions a lot of time when I was in Rwanda. Say, okay, you build this data set. How would you have built a data set of 1 billion tokens, for example, from just 400 word lists? And it is very simple. I understand that the morphological properties of words are embedded in the system of using the words. I know the syntactic pattern are embedded. So I know, for example, that now in African languages generally they can express, I don't know, maybe the language has it right. They can express noun class, so they take morpheme for noun class, they take morpheme for number, they take morpheme for gender, right? So I know a noun can actually be noun class, a noun can actually be number, that it can be, excuse me, it can be plural or singular. A noun can be gender based, so it can be man or woman. Okay, so I have these three morphological properties. So suppose I have the word goat. I want to see the word goat. So how do I distribute these words so that I can have a lot of data sets just from these words, from this single word? Sorry. So I said, okay, what is goat in your language? And the person said this. Let's say the person say ah. The goat in our language is called ah. So and I said, okay, I remember that this is a noun, isn't it? I remember that now we inflect for number, right? I can say, so what is goats? That's the plural form. And the person say, okay, yeah, it is this way. I say, let's say the person say ah. So I know, okay, if I say ah is goat, if I say ah is goat, two goats or many goats, right? So I know that nouns inflect for gender. So I go over the goats again. I say, can you say male goat and female goat? Say yes. I can say this. Let's say ba, and female goat as ba. So can you tell me female goats? That's the plural, and then male goats. That is singular. Then you can see from a single word, I'm just at the morphological information. I'm not even at the syntactic information yet. So from the linguistic implementation, from my linguistic knowledge, I can implement these things into my machine dataset building, and everything systematically collected. I understand why, for example, the word is in this context. Machine does not understand why the word is in context. They don't know that what they are learning, right? So I know that this is I'm building, and this is how and why I'm building this particular dataset per time. So I hope I didn't take much of your time. I was trying to simplify it. I'll be happy to take more of your questions. Thank you.
Yes, Samuel, thank you so much. So I think you should leave. I have a message here requesting for your email or something. They can contact you. So kindly drop your LinkedIn account or email so they can contact you for further information on how to build a data set. We are going to move on to our last presentation before we take any other questions. So please let's welcome Isidore. So Isidore, you have the floor now. Isidore is going to present. He's our final speaker for the day. Yes. Even before Isidore starts, for our speakers who have taken the floor already, I think you should leave your LinkedIn account, your email, where you prefer to be contacted if they need any further information. If that is okay with you, you can leave that in the chat box.
Can you all see my my screen?
Yes, we can.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. I think after listening to the other three presenters, I feel that what I'm going to do is to bring everything together, right? Sorry, and I'm glad I'm the last person, because my research touches on each of the presenters and some of the things that they've talked about. I started by saying that I came to translation research very late, recently, just last year. But I've been studying technology-related issues. And my main concern is to look at the gap between what we say about technology and how it actually works, so that if we say that biometric technology is credible, is this, and it can capture electoral voters accurately, and then you go to the field and the biometric technology rejects some people, then you start asking questions. Why did they reject this person and that person? So this leads me to my previous research. And I like the fact that Samuel and Motora and Laura indicate the need to collaborate, the need to share stories. So my initial contact to Rebecca was to draw discrimination. So that's why I'm here. And want to solicit your help. I'll be sending out surveys. I'm working with a survey company in Ghana, Hasbeck Analytics. We'll be reaching out to most of you. If you hear from them, you know that I have sent them, all right? I'm looking for stories that can help me report user experience to designers of technology so that these designers will take into consideration cultural practices in African context when they design translation technologies. And why did I get to this point? I got to this point.
So I'm going to give this one now to Olanrewaju.
When I had an excellent and interesting encounter on Facebook. So I took a screenshot of the conversation that went on. But a video went out, was viral on Facebook. It was about a Ghanaian, a UCC student who received a graduating student who received about 16 awards out of 22. So it went viral on Facebook, was just receiving the awards, So fellow Facebook users were just commenting, and on the left side, my left side, right? So that would be your right. You see that someone said, Aquano have been rough, right? And then another person said, Wabin to. And then the same person said, Wabin Seja, right? These are all Akan phrases. And Samuel mentioned Akan as one of the Ghanaian languages. These are Akan phrases. So fortunately, Facebook had a translation, right, from Akan to English. So I just clicked on the translation, and they were being said, they were being to Facebook translated that to be "You are welcome," and then they were being said, "And the son of a bitch," right? So wabintu, and an expression that celebrates someone's ingenuity, someone's smartness, become and a son of a bitch. And then you start asking a question. Is this just a glitch? Is this just a glitch? Should we just say that, oh, Facebook just made an error, so yeah, they will correct it later? A glitch, some scholars will say, is just a temporal blip, right? So maybe let's ignore this. It's just a temporary blip or a minor problem. But other scholars are saying that no, that glitch is not a minor problem. It shows the biases embedded in technology, and they are more than glitches. They are baked in from the beginning. So biases are baked in from the beginning. They are structural, and they can't be addressed with a quick code update. Benjamin says that this is more than a glitch. It is a form of exclusion and subordination. And so that when Samuel talked about data and how we are building data, and when he took us through data, it tells us that data building is not a normal or natural process or objective process. That data process, data building is not objective. It's the culture of the use of the designers and the researchers who are gathering the data, is the question they are asking, it's the cultural practices they are taking into consideration. That becomes data. That becomes the code that is being fed into the design of translation technologies. So Facebook's glitch is not just an example of any glitch. One Willie will call that the coded gaze. And what is the coded gaze? The coded gaze is that it's looking at that African context from a limited European westernized notion and issues of what? Colonization, right? And colonial rhetorics. How did Wabin Seja become son of a bitch? How have the African language or African cultural practices been represented over the years, been represented in the data? So that if we are not able to challenge these people, they will keep representing African cultural practices, African languages in these negative and offensive terms. How do we correct that? Samuel says we should collaborate. Motonra says we should collaborate. Laura says we should collaborate. And I'm saying that we should share stories. So please, be ready to share your stories with me so that we can speak back and write back. This is how we can take advantage of what? Machine translation technologies. If we keep mute and not talk about it, if we do not let them know what technologies that they are developing, what harms and discriminations they are perpetrating, our languages will still be denigrated. We will not be respected. It's taking power. One Willie will call that the coded gaze. That's why. And what is the coded gaze? To you? The coded gaze. That's why I'm pleading. It's looking at that African context. Please, from share your experiences. And I have my email. I'll share my email with you. If you come across any of these negative translation practices, please don't hesitate to email them to me, because we need to what? Counter these biases that are embedded into the data. Data is not objective. Data is not neutral. And if we want to influence data, then we have to start sharing our stories. Tell them the technologies they are designing. Tell them the harms that they are causing to African languages and African cultural practices. Whenever we translate a language, it's not just from the source to the target. We are translating the cultural practices of a community. We are translating the philosophies and practices. So we can't let these technologies denigrate our cultural practices. We can't let this go or slide as business as usual. No, that time is gone, long gone ago. So that if we want to see translation technologies that respect us, we need to start sharing our stories and getting back to designers. One scholar I value a lot, Watson San, says that the only way to influence technology design is when what? Use is linked to design, right? So use practices and use challenges. When we link those to designers, when we let them know, when we talk about it, when we share our stories, when we collaborate, then we can have translation technologies that accurately represent our cultural practices. Then we can be confident about the machine translation technologies that we are adopting and using. That's how we can localize and gain power. These are things that we need to be thinking about. So in my work, I'm arguing that glitches are not mere technical errors. They expose the dangers and opportunities of technology. More specifically, they expose the cultural erasure embedded in the structural design of algorithmic powered translation technologies. We are looking at discriminations. Translation error is more than a technological glitch. So when you are translating from one language to the other, especially to African languages, and you see an error, don't think it's normal. I think that some scholars say that we think that these errors are normal because we believe that technology is objective, technology is neutral. But from my standpoint, from a critical standpoint, technology is never objective. Technology is political. Technology design is politics. It's politics in the sense that it pays attention to the cultural practices that are informing. And over the years, when Europeans and Western scholars gather data from us, they just gather it. We don't have any input. They take it from us and they go use it the way they want. We have no influence. How did Wabin Seja become son of a bitch? It means that we have to start questioning the models that Facebook is using to train its translation technologies. We need to start questioning the models that Google is using to train its translation technologies. These are important things that we need to do. We cannot say that technology design or technology breakdown is normal, or this, oh yeah, it's struggling to translate from this language. It's okay, let's use a different technology. No, we need to start sharing our stories and talk about this, right? So in my work, that current work that I'm pursuing, I'm looking at these questions. What cultural myths, ideas, and images and values about AI translation that are normalized? How do we normalize? How do we talk about translation technologies? How do we question them? What are some glitches that you, translators, what are some glitches that you identify in your daily practices? How are those errors? How can we link those errors to structural discrimination against missing people? I'm using missing people because most non-Western cultures are missing people, right? We don't have the power to inform. We don't have the money to influence design, so we are missing. They are using what Western models to start to keep interpreting our cultural practices. That is why a colonial rhetoric of the dark continent, of that offensive continent, will translate into this translation of Wabin Seja to be what? Son of a bitch. Because again, we are Africans, right? Are we ever polite? Inclusive.
Oh, I think Isidore, okay. You
That
lost you at the
Oh, sorry, that are inclusive, that are just, right? And this quote also centers around my three previous presenters. There's the need to center the cultural practices of missing people, and especially those are at the margins. And at this point, Africans and our cultural practices are at the margins. We don't have the power. We need to move to the center. The margins who have experienced what it means to be excluded. We are being excluded. Our practices are not being included in technology design. We only go and then buy it because we've read about that technology. But do we consider how those technologies have included our cultural practices and how we can even inform? As individual translators, we have a role. What can we do to share our stories, to document harms, and demand that our dignity be a priority? It shouldn't be an afterthought. That's what we talk about when we say that user experience should inform design, when we say that lived experience should inform design practices. We cannot sit back. If we sit down, how do they, designers, know about the harms, the discrimination that they are perpetrating? How do they question the data that they are gathering and coding and encoding into technologies that are being exported or transported to African countries? There is the need to speak back. And that's why I'm conducting this research. And that's why I'm coming to you again. We need to reconsider how technologies are designed, developed, and deployed. And we have to be active participants in this process. We have power. We have power. We can do that. There needs, again, as individuals, this is what we can do. And as I've already talked about, there needs to be strong policies at the local level. There needs to be strong policies. I know that a couple of months ago, or maybe last year, Ursula Owusu, the Minister of Communication, came to Parliament and was everywhere, right? Saying that, oh, we are going to design AI policy. I've not heard anything from that from her. I don't know if that policy ever came out. That policy is not out. I know that the Parliament of Ghana had several conversations about AI and how AI is destroying jobs, not the cultural practices, but the jobs, right? What has been done? Nothing. We need to speak and walk the talk. Western cultures are able to do that because they have power, right? They can call Facebook, why are you doing this?